Well, he's in North Carolina and Virginia on the last I'm not even. How did you find out about that?
Because they would have programmed that in to make us feel comfortable. walk in and we're just like, camera out.
I'm like, no, I don't want to be on camera.
With Obama was a great primary. I can see the back of my head on this. But it's not his fault.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the beautiful and historic city of Alexandria. My name is Crowne Plaza, and as one of the new city council members, I'm proud to be part of the leadership of the best city in the Commonwealth. Bienvenidos todos a la hermosa y histórica ciudad de Alexandria. Mi nombre es Crowne Plaza y como uno de los nuevos concejales estoy orgulloso de ser parte del liderazgo de la mejor ciudad en el estado. Antes de empezar, quiero reconocer a algunos de los oficiales electos y líderes del partido quienes están con nosotros. Before we start, I'd like to recognize some of our elected officials and party leaders in the room. So I believe we have Senator Adam Eben in the back. We also have, I believe, Delegate Mark Levine right over here. I believe my colleague, Councilman Mo Seifeldin, is here. Yeah, Mo. Also, I believe school board chair or school board member Margaret Lorber. Let's see. Did I see any other electeds? Did I see someone out there? No? All right. I'd also like to recognize quickly our 8th District Chair, Margot Horner. She's in the room. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say a big thank you to our local Alexandria Democratic Committee Chair, Clarence Tong. So local elections matter, so I want to take a quick aside. This year we have a lot of different elections going on in Virginia, because in Virginia we have elections every year, and we actually have the opportunity to flip both the House, Senate, and the House of Delegates here in Virginia. So if you're a Virginian, make sure you get registered, go register 5 other people, and we're going to take the momentum from flipping the House and the Senate, and then take that into 2020. Clerk of Court is also on the ballot here in Alexandria. All right, I'll keep this short because I know y'all aren't here to hear me talk. But I was excited to find out that one of our Democratic candidates for president was stopping by here in Alexandria. Personally, this is someone I've been looking forward to meeting and learning more about their vision for the future of our country. While I was out campaigning last year, not too far from where we are now, by the Charles Houston Rec Center, I ran into something and I had to do a double take. There were a lot of yard signs out for different candidates, and mind you, there was 12 of us running for city council. But this one really struck me. His campaign was all the way out in the Lone Star State, almost 2,000 miles away. But lo and behold, there was a Beto for Senate yard sign. Standing strong right here in Alexandria. Born and raised in El Paso, Beto, a fourth-generation Texan, was able to stir excitement on the other side of the country. And by the look of this room, he's still doing it. This is so important because we don't have to look farther than across the river to see many of the injustices that are occurring today. Right here in Alexandria, we saw firsthand the impact of a needless government shutdown that affected our friends and neighbors. More recently, we have seen the tremendous bounds in the Commonwealth with Medicaid expansion, where now more than 250,000 Virginians have health care for the very first time. But our health care, which should be a universal right, is under constant attack from those on the other side of the aisle. Sadly, we have also seen the fear generated in our immigrant communities. The mere mention of an ICE raid, the separation of families, and the horror of children being placed in cages. In Northern Virginia, the most diverse part of the Commonwealth, we embrace this diversity. In Alexandria, our students in our public schools speak more than 100 different languages. It's inspiring to hear that Beto pulls from his hometown value, respecting and embracing our differences rather than fearing them. Like the congressman has said, our families deserve a real opportunity to share in our nation's success. Personalmente, estoy muy emocionado que algunos de nuestros candidatos demócratas hablen español, porque la comunidad latina está creciendo cada día. Más bien, es importante reconocer que nosotros vivimos en un país diverso, y eso es un punto de orgullo, que no debemos dejar dividirnos, sino exaltar como una de nuestras grandes fuerzas. Nuestra diversidad siempre la debemos celebrar. Personally, I am excited that several of our Democratic candidates speak Spanish, because the Latino community is growing every day. More importantly, we need to recognize that we live in such a diverse country, and that should be a point of pride, not a point of division. And to go further, we need to hold this up as one of our greatest strengths. We need to always celebrate our diversity. What Beto did in Texas, crisscrossing all 254 counties, was not only increasing younger voter turnout by almost 500% and spurring statewide change, but showing what it means to fight for every vote, compete everywhere with everyone, red, blue, Latino, black, white, Asian, urban, rural, young, and old. That's what we need in this 2020 election, to fight for every vote. To fight for every vote across every state, every county, every town, and every city. Because when we vote, we win. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very proud to announce to you former Congressman of the 16th District of Texas and candidate for President of the United States of America, Robert Beto O'Rourke.
Alexandria, how are we doing? Good to see you all. Thank you very much. Gracias. Alexandria, thank you for having us out. To our friends who made the trip from our nation's capital, the future state of Washington, D.C., we are grateful that you made the trip. And to Kanik Aguirre, council member here in Alexandria, for your service over the last 104 days. As a new member of the city council here, for introducing us, for welcoming us, for putting this great group of people here together in your community, for greeting us with your father and with your wife, AJ. We are grateful to you now and forever. Thank you. This has been an extraordinary visit. to the Commonwealth of Virginia over these last 2 days. Got to meet so many extraordinary people who are doing so much for this Commonwealth and by extension, our country. In 2017, when we were thinking about running for Senate and then began a campaign with not a single dime from a single political action committee, running in a place that was written off as too red to count, going to each one of those 254 counties, we took heart, though we were competing against the odds and against Ted Cruz, in what you were able to accomplish here in Virginia in that year 2017. The changes that you forced, that you obtained, the offices that you won, the policies now in place, an expansion of Medicaid that has helped 400,000 of our fellow Virginians get the care that they need, see a doctor, afford prescriptions, take their child to a therapist. The changes that you will achieve as we mark 12 years and 1 day since a massacre at Virginia Tech that claimed 32 lives. When we all get behind these great candidates who will be our delegates and senators in the Commonwealth, Virginia will pass universal background checks. And we will save more lives in this Commonwealth and in this country. When we get new leadership in 2019, we will begin to pay our public school educators what they are worth. No school bus driver or cafeteria worker or custodian or counselor or librarian or nurse or instructor in the classroom should be working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet when they have the most important job in front of them. That child whose lifelong love of learning, once unlocked, will make them unstoppable, ensure that this country is unbeatable, paying them a living wage, ensuring that education begins not at 4 or 5 years old in kindergarten, where some kids on the first day are already 10 months back in reading comprehension, 12 months back in math, but begins universally in pre-K at 3 or 4 years old. For every child, the same starting line, better opportunity and outcomes, contributing to the greatness and the success of this country. We make sure that we follow the lead of Moms Demand Action and not just have universal background checks, but ensure that weapons designed, engineered, and sold to the United States military, because they are very good at killing people in great numbers effectively and efficiently, are no longer sold into our communities, where they end up in our schools, in our churches, in our concerts, in our public life. There are some special heroes for me in my life in this room today. I just saw Laura Halverson, who's been an absolute champion for civil rights in this country, who ensured that I and my fellow colleagues in Congress understood the rollbacks being proposed to the Americans with Disabilities Act, has made me so much smarter and better as a representative and as a candidate. And I'm so grateful to see you here today. Elena and is this Xiomara, who are here, the little lobbyists who ensure that when we're talking about Medicaid or universal, high-quality, guaranteed health care, that we're also talking about kids who are medically complex, who are amazing, who should have every right to live to their full potential, whose parents should never have to live with the anxiety of worrying about a lifetime cap or pre-existing conditions or navigating the bureaucracy of an insurance company, but should be able to focus on their children so that those kids fulfill their promise over the course of their lifetimes. Her advocacy has, in part, ensured expansion of Medicaid in this state and guaranteed that in a country that today is the wealthiest, the most powerful on the face of the planet, the most medically and technologically advanced ever known to humankind, that does not lack for resources, but does for political will, finds the courage and the resolve, the common ground to achieve the common cause of guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care for every child, every woman, every man in this country, in every state and territory of the Union. And that in a country where far too many in 2019 will die of diabetes, though insulin was developed 97 years ago by scientists in Canada who sold it to the University of Toronto for $3 Canadian with no hope of profit or royalties. We'll get to your question in just a second, sir. I just want to make sure everyone else can listen. I just want to make sure that everyone else can listen. It's cool, it's cool, it's cool, it's cool. Okay. I'm sorry that your camera was smacked. We are here with you, okay? It's good, it's good. Let's just, it's cool. Let's just keep it down a little bit. Let's just keep. Okay, it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. It's cool. It's cool. It's okay. So listen. There is no reason that in this country, where we all care about one another, care for one another, defined not by party or race or any other difference that should not matter, that we cannot come together to make sure that people aren't crowdfunding their insulin treatment, that nurses who administer insulin aren't dying of diabetes as they are doing today, as they ration the care for themselves while they provide it for everybody else, that we meet the challenge of curable cancers and ensure that not another school teacher dies of the flu, as one did in Weatherford, Texas a couple of years back. She had insurance, but she did not have guaranteed health care. She did not have the $119 that was the copay on her flu medication, and that is what she died from. We all lose out on what she would have been able to do over the course of her life, and it is a stain on our conscience, but something that we can match with the resolve, with the purpose that we have in common and together, the same way that we will meet the challenge of the fact that in my home state, and so many other states of this country, the largest provider of mental health care services today is the county jail system. Those living with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, clinical depression, too often, when they do not have care, get arrested on purpose to go to the one place they are guaranteed the care, the food, the shirt on their back, the prescription to a psychotropic medication that will temporarily alleviate their suffering and their pain and allow them to get on with their lives. We've got to make sure that universal care also means universal access to mental health care. And take it from a state like ours in Texas, whose legislature and governors and those in positions of public trust have shut down more than a quarter of our family planning clinics, making it hard for a woman not only to legally obtain an abortion, which since 1973 has been the law of the land, but also prevented them in a state that has failed to expand Medicaid to get a cervical cancer screening, see a family planning provider, or see a provider of any kind not unrelated to a maternal mortality crisis in our state that is 3 times as deadly for women of color. So universal health care also means every woman makes her own decisions about her own body and has access to the care to ensure that she can. We can report from El Paso, one half of the largest binational community in the hemisphere. What high school? Father Yermo, that's okay. You got it. Let me finish and then we're going to get you the microphone. 3 million from 2 countries in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, joined, not separated by the Rio Grande River, forming something far greater than the sum of our parts or the number of people. It's absolutely magical. El Paso, Texas today, and for 20 years running, has been one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. And that is not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, but because we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. We don't respect or tolerate our differences. We embrace them. We understand that it makes us stronger as a community, more successful as a state, and yes, safer and more secure as a country. You will not purchase that security with a 2,000-mile, 30-foot high, $30 billion wall, which if built will not be placed on the international boundary, which is the center line of the Rio Grande River Channel, but will be miles into the interior of the United States, forcing you and me to take our fellow Americans' farms and ranches and homes and property to solve a problem we do not have. Last year, there were 400,000 apprehensions at our border, so many of them turning themselves in the parlance of the Border Patrol, arresting themselves. Kids, 5, 10, 15 years old, traveling on their own for 2,000 miles. If they are lucky, their parents were accompanying them. On foot, atop a train, not inside, known as the Beast or La Bestia. Fleeing the deadliest places on the planet today, doing exactly what Amy and I would do if faced with the same conditions and consequences for our kids. Doing what any human being would do if faced with the same challenges. And at their most desperate and vulnerable moment, as they approach this land of refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants seeking safety and refuge and shelter, instead of any of that, they find their worst nightmare. That child taken from that mother's arms by force if necessary, and yes, we did that. That mother deported back to the very country from which she fled in the first place, we did that as well. The child placed in a cage, turned over to Health and Human Services, referred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and then settled in a foster care home in literally God only knows where. For months, which will become years, those families separated, visiting a torture and a cruelty that I hope none of us can fully imagine or will ever experience. I have been at El Paso, at Annunciation House, when some of those families, lucky enough to be reunited, saw themselves again for the first time. And that child, that 8-year-old, instead of a big smile on their face or tears of joy coming down their cheeks or an impatience to tell their mother or father what they had just experienced, the way my 8-year-old Henry is impatient to tell me what he's just done at school when I haven't been home for weeks at a time. There is nothing on that kid's face, absolutely vacant, unable to reconnect with the person with whom she associates the greatest pain and suffering that a human being can endure. We have done unspeakable damage to these children, and take no comfort that it was Donald Trump or a Republican president. For as long as we are a democracy and we are a government of the people, then this is on every single one of us for as long as it persists. So we must all commit ourselves to ensuring that we never again take another child from another parent at our border, that we reunite those families that have been separated as quickly as possible, whatever it takes and whatever it costs. That instead of cutting $500 million, which is all that we invest in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, to reduce the violence, to prevent those families from sending their kids on that 2,000-mile journey, that we double that funding. We invested in violence reduction. We help those families in those countries. And I know some of this know this better than others. Those countries who are suffering in part because of things that we do in this country. We are 4% of the globe's population. We consume 25% of her illegal drugs, which have to originate somewhere and transit through another place. We have led a war on drugs that we have forced on our partners and our allies and our neighbors in the Western Hemisphere, militarizing their communities and their police forces, hollowing out their civil society. We opposed and then deposed a democratically elected president in Guatemala in the 1950s, involved ourselves in the civil wars in Nicaragua and El Salvador, used Honduras functionally as an aircraft carrier for our military involvement in that region, deported people back after we jailed them for being here undocumented. And when we reap the consequences of our failed policies, of our lack of investment, of our inability to see our common humanity, we call it a crisis for this country when it's really a crisis for those families and those people. The way to address this is not with walls or cages or militarization or hatred, not the president's words to describe Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, asylum seekers as animals or an infestation. It is in us seeing our future tied to those to whom we are connected literally by land and by tradition and by culture and by family. Let's reprioritize the foreign policy of this country away from wars and violence and towards helping our fellow woman and man, especially those in Central America right now. And then, while we are at it, let's use this as an opportunity to rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image, to reflect our values, what we think is important, what we know to be right here in Alexandria, back home in El Paso. Begin by freeing every dreamer from any fear of deportation. Make them U.S. citizens here in their true home country. Do not do it at the price of their parents. Bring them out of the shadows as well, and allow millions more to come out and contribute to their full capacity to our shared success and greatness. This is not a Democratic Party value. This is an American value. There's a way to bring Republicans and independents and Democrats alike to the table, to this conversation, and to the solution. Just as there is in our effort to confront the fact that we imprison more of our own people per capita than any other country on the face of the planet, disproportionately comprised of people of color, too many doing time for a nonviolent drug crime, like possession of marijuana, which is legal or decriminalized or medicinalized in the majority of the states in the union. And yet right now, though Americans of all races and ethnicities use marijuana at roughly the same rate, more likely than not, it will be people of color who are stopped and frisked and arrested and imprisoned, and upon release, forced to check a box on every employment application form saying that they have this conviction, meaning that they will not get that job, who are no longer eligible for federally sponsored student loans, who have their options constrained and their futures narrowed. And it's a drag not just on them and their families, it's a drag on this economy and this country. So we must not only end the war on drugs, end the prohibition on marijuana, but expunge the arrest records of everyone caught in possession of something that will not kill you and to which you will not become addicted. We will go beyond that by ending for-profit prisons in this country. No one gets rich by locking you up. But we will also understand that the injustices that we just described are not limited to the criminal justice system. When you see health disparities in this country, I mentioned maternal mortality rates 3 times as high for women of color. The disparity between infant mortality in white America and black America is greater today than it was in 1850, 15 years before the abolition of slavery. There is 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. And a 5-year-old child in that kindergarten classroom that I referred to earlier, 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled if they are a child of color. So it's not just criminal justice, it's not just healthcare, it's not just education, it's not just the economy, it is this country. A country that was literally built on the backs of those kidnapped and brought here in bondage, enslaved to build the wealth that they would never share in. Their children and descendants who endured segregation and Jim Crow and continuing suppression in the United States, not able to fully participate economically, nor are they democratically. Texas ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout before 2018. And it is not because we love our democracy less than you do here in Virginia. We were drawn that way literally by our state legislature. Based on your race, your ethnicity, you were drawn out of a congressional district. Therefore, a reason to vote. Therefore, the very democracy that is supposed to represent all of us. Racist voter ID laws, where you can use your license to carry a firearm in Texas to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID at Texas Southern University to prove who you are at the ballot box. Until we transcend these barriers and limitations and this racism in the country, compounded by a president who calls Klansmen and Nazis and white supremacists very fine people, who just tweeted a video of Representative Ilhan Omar, a Muslim member of Congress, and conflated her speech with the attacks on 9/11. He is stoking fear and paranoia, provoking hatred and violence, and it is working. Hate crimes in this country up for the last 3 years. The day that he signed the Muslim ban in 2017, they burned down the mosque in Victoria, Texas. You don't get kids in cages until you refer to them as animals first. So if we are willing to confront this and not just condemn it, but to transcend it by telling the true, honest, factual story of this country, how we built our wealth, the inequalities that we have here today, we can begin the important work of repair, and we can discontinue visiting these injustices on the future generations of Americans. Because we will need all of us to meet any of these challenges. The economy, healthcare, education, criminal justice, and perhaps the biggest of them all, we were at a town hall in West Texas, small, rural, Republican farming community. Farmer walked in. She said, listen, we're missing my son's basketball game to be here. I'm a Republican, never come to one of these, and I didn't think my first would be with a Democrat. But I'm here because I farm the same land that my grandparents did and my parents before me. But what they planted and grew, we are planting and is not growing. Climate change, she told me, is not something that I've got to prepare these little people for. It is something that is happening right now. In the Panhandle in West Texas, 5 years of drought through which our farmers attempted to persist in growing the food and the fiber that feeds and clothes not just this country, but so much of the rest of the world. In Houston, Texas, 58 inches of rain dropped from the sky. The landfall record for as long as we have been keeping them in North America. And it was the third 500-year flood in just 5 years in Houston, Texas. Folks had not finished rebuilding their homes from the last one before they were hit with the next one. The fires in California, the flooding in the Missouri River that ravaged farms and farmers who were already underwater in debt, and now their fields and their livestock, the soybeans, the grains are underwater as well. 4 times the normal runoff in the Missouri River Basin from a normal year, and the greatest runoff that we've seen for as long as we've been keeping records along the Missouri River. The scientists, if we will listen to them, tell us that this planet has cooked 1 degree Celsius just since 1980 over pre-industrial revolution levels, and that we are on track to warm another degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, maybe 4 degrees on this current trajectory. And those fires, those floods, those droughts will become more profound, more frequent, more devastating of our property and our lives. If you think 400,000 apprehensions at the southern border is a lot, wait till some countries in the Western Hemisphere can no longer support human life, because that is where we are headed today. Those same scientists say there are 10 years left to us to get this right, to free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, to embrace wind and solar, the jobs and economic growth that come along with it, to allow farmers to do their part, give them an incentive in the Farm Bill to plant cover crops, to capture carbon out of the air, new technologies like precision tilling to disturb less of the carbon that is in the soil. If all of us do our part in this country, at this moment of truth, we can then take our rightful role as the indispensable nation, convene the other powers of the planet to come together to solve an otherwise intractable problem, not just sign up to the Paris climate agreements again, but to make sure that we take the next necessary, urgent steps to save this planet from our own excesses, our own emissions, and our own inaction. This is a challenge that cannot be met by half measures or by only half the country. It's going to take all of us. And that's the way that we're campaigning, showing up everywhere for everyone. No me importa who you pray to, who you love, what party you belong to, who's calling you right now on your cell phone, how many generations you can count yourself an American, or whether you just got here this morning. All that matters at this point is that we are Americans first. We have the challenge before us, and we cannot be found wanting. For those reasons, I'm running to serve you as the next President of the United States of America. And I am grateful to be here with you, Alexandria. Thank you for having us out. Espero sus preguntas, sus comentarios, sus ideas. If you've got a question or a comment or an idea or suggestion, Cynthia Cano has got a microphone.
Over here, Beto, right
Where
behind you.
is right
behind
here?
You.
Oh,
Behind
okay.
you. Here we go.
There
right
we go.
here.
Cynthia's got a microphone. Get her attention. She will bring it to you. Les agradezco. Gracias. Y espero sus preguntas.
Okay, we're going to do a quick question.
¿Qué es de nuevo? Todos bastante bien.
Mucho gusto.
How are you?
Good.
I just want to say that this man here,
Well, let's focus on the future. That happened in the past. What do you want to do going forward?
well, yeah.
No. Here you go.
Wait, I wasn't finished.
Okay. I just have a comment that I hadn't decided who to vote for the primaries, but then I saw your answer on when you were asked about why athletes kneel, and I really appreciated. I really appreciated your honesty, because that was an audience that it would have been easy to give like a politician's answer. And that taught me that if you were honest then, when the person already said that they did not support it, that led me to feel that whatever you say, I could trust it. So you're my number one choice.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the comment.
So, okay, I wrote my question down. So you said that if you were elected, you would sign the Equality Act into law.
Yes.
That would help ensure LGBT rights under Title VII here in Virginia, as well as 25 other states. My question is, knowing the Supreme Court has a conservative tilt, how would you as president address the possibility that it could be struck down?
Yeah. Really good question. And just to provide the context for those not aware, in the Commonwealth in Texas, you can be fired based on your sexual orientation. In Texas, 30,000 kids in the foster care system. CPS so badly funded that kids were sleeping on top of, underneath the desks. You can be too gay in Texas to adopt one of those kids into your loving home. It's a defense in a court of law in Texas if you've killed someone of the same sex because they came on to you in a bar or on the street. This is wrong. In Texas, we just debated a transgender bathroom bill. Seriously, after all the shit that happened, all the stuff that happened in North Carolina, all the stuff. This microphone's not working. All the stuff that happened in North Carolina. Trying to scare parents about transgender children, though transgender children are far more often to be the victims than the perpetrators of an attack. And then this president, literally turning his back on the service of transgender service members who, from the very beginning of this country have been serving in the armed forces. We don't know how many times they have sacrificed their lives for us and America, how many times they have saved the lives of others. And at every turn in this country's history, we said, well, if we integrate the armed forces by race, it's going to make us weaker. If we integrate the armed forces by gender, it's going to make us weaker. If we do it by sexual orientation, it's going to make us weaker. It has made us stronger every single time. Many of us, myself included, labored under the illusion that progress on rights, including civil rights, was inexorable. Maybe it was going too slow sometimes. Maybe you were really disappointed and don't ask, don't tell, but bit by bit, year by year, we were going to move in the right direction. 2016 and this administration has shattered those illusions. We can go backwards in time. We can turn our backs on those transgender service members. So not only will we ensure that we cancel this president's executive order and welcome transgender service members into the United States military again, not only will we sign into law the Equality Act that ensures the full civil rights of every American in this Commonwealth, in my state, wherever they are, regardless of their sexual orientation, but for the Supreme Court and the next nominee that is proposed, we will ensure that they believe in people and not corporations, and do not think that corporations are people and that money is speech and that corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money in our elections. They will believe in a woman's right to make her own decisions about her own body and Roe versus Wade. And they will believe in the full civil rights of every single American. That will be our litmus test for the next nominee. Thank you.
Okay, to your right, to your right. And there are a lot of hands up. I promise I will get to as many as I can.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine. I first saw you at a Beers for Beto in D.C., and there were a lot of other people that did, and I was so taken with your intelligence and charisma and ability to communicate, I'm going to sit down, that I actually went to Texas and helped campaign for you. But I have to say, this is a sort of critique in asking you to go forward. Okay, so there were a lot on TV, a lot of what I call kumbaya ads, but not a lot of ads really distinguishing yourself from your opponent. So I'm asking this time, I hear it's very easy to distinguish yourself from Trump, but and I know you've said that you're not going to say anything negative about your fellow candidates, but this is a race. The primary is a race. How would you, I don't know if you were prepared to discuss this now, but at some point you're going to have to distinguish yourself from the other candidates who are running. That's number one. And number two, I haven't seen you on any MSNBC recently. I haven't seen you on TV, and other candidates have been, on the airwaves morning, noon, and night. And that's of concern to me. And I'm, okay. And I'm really happy that you have an article in The Nation about your views on the military, because I think it's important that you get those things out. Yes.
Appreciate it. So a couple of things real quick on our campaign to be the Democratic nominee. We're going to go everywhere, listen to, talk with everyone, show up with the courage of our convictions, those things that we believe in, that we will not change because we will not poll test them or focus group drive them. We just know them in our heart, but we'll also show up to listen and to learn, and we've learned a ton in Virginia so far. But I will do nothing to diminish or demean or vilify another Democratic candidate, because come summer of 2020, we will all get behind the same nominee, whoever she or he may be, and we will ensure that they defeat Donald Trump. And those policies that we talked about, whether it's in our criminal justice system or health care or immigration, we're going to stay firmly focused on the future, what it is we want to achieve. We're not going to descend into the pettiness and the partisanship and the smallness and the hatred that defines so much of what this current administration and their enablers in Congress are doing right now. I will make sure that you understand what I want to do for this country and that I want to do it with you and everyone who makes it possible. As far as MSNBC or the cable television networks, one of my all-time heroes, and the people who were part of this record label, Discord Records, and Ian Mackay and Jeff Nelson, they had this do-it-yourself philosophy, started their own record labels, wrote their own songs, booked their own tours, ensured that everyone could see them and that they could see everybody. We have held more town halls in the month and 4 days that we've been doing this than I think any other candidate, because meeting you eyeball to me is so much more satisfying than being on cable TV and in a soundbite or in a sentence trying to describe what's the most important to this country. At some point, I may have to give in and be on your television set, but right now I want to be with you in person. So give me some time. Thank you.
All right, here's our next question.
Well, my name is Eric, and what I wanted to go ahead and say is that when I was 4 years old, I came from El Salvador. My mom, she had already come. We were fleeing that dangerous environment. I know that you mentioned that walls are not going to stop it, and that's completely the truth. If anything were to break out here, for God's sake, we don't want that to happen. I know that in the future, I would do anything, no matter what barrier there was, to protect my children, to protect my future kids. Whatever wall there was, I would run away from that. Now, you did mention that you would increase the funding to these countries that are down there. We're talking about El Salvador, Honduras. But what other methods are you contemplating in order to protect that and to also go after dictatorships? We're talking about the Maduro regime, that you're seeing so much chaos going on there. And then it was just released that they're a part of the cocaine epidemic, that the government is being part of that. What other policies would you suggest in resolving issues like that?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. First and foremost, do no harm and do not make the situation any worse. Our current president has threatened to militarily invade Venezuela. You tell me how our military interventions in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Guatemala and other parts of the world have worked out so far. It'll create more suffering, more harm, more people fleeing those countries to come to this country. So we must recognize Guaidó as a legitimate temporary president because that's the constitution of Venezuela, but we must not use military force or violence or coercion to impose our will on another country. That never works. We should have the humility of understanding that it's up to the people of Venezuela to determine that. We should consider TPS, temporary protected status, from people who cannot stay in that country because they're on the verge of starvation. Their government can no longer protect them. It's the right thing to do. And to acknowledge that though we must invest in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America, and those who've studied this can attest that investment, not necessarily with governments and not with military hardware and not militarizing their police forces, but at the village and community level in reducing violence, reduces the need for people to leave, is a very smart investment for the United States to make. And then lastly, we should accept and acknowledge that when asylum seekers come here and when they're allowed to stay, not only do they do better, they make us a much better country as a result. Their families, their kids, the genius that they reveal to the world, that all occurs here in the United States of America. And ultimately, we as a country are the beneficiaries. So thank you for asking.
My brother and friends have life-threatening food allergies. I was wondering what your opinion is on having strict food allergen labeling standards.
Thank you for being here. That sounds like a very good idea. And as president, would love to work with you to make sure, and your friends, to make sure that we get that done, to protect the lives, and in some cases save the lives of those who would be threatened by having packaging that does not disclose what the contents are. So you want to work with me on that? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Good job. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, we're in the back of the room by the door that you came in from.
Hi, Beto.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Vasquez. I'm a current resident of Alexandria, Fairfax County, but I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. So my whole family, with the exception of my husband and myself, we're the only ones here. And so I go every Christmas. And this Christmas Eve, I was there when ICE dumped almost 700 people on the streets of El Paso. I was there at Annunciation House with Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, getting food ready, getting that, and helping out, getting the word out, helping those people out. I see that because I'm from an El Pasoan, but you're running for president now. And I want you to tell people across the country that don't get to experience El Paso like you and I do, that we don't see the greatness that is to be in a binational community. And, you know, I'm a Mexican descent. My parents came from Mexico. I have a master's degree, went to UTEP, did everything. But what are you and your team working for as far as immigration? The gentleman that asked the question earlier, we want to know, the country wants to know what you're going to do to fix our broken immigration system, because it is broken. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And thank you for raising the example of El Paso. I mentioned that our safety, one of the safest cities in America, is in part predicated on the fact that people the world over have found a home in our community. 24% of our fellow El Pasoans were born somewhere else. They chose us. They left their family, their culture very often, too often, their language, their comfort, to start again, to do better for themselves and their kids, but also to do better for all of us. And they have. Christmas Eve, I was with you. I was at the Greyhound bus station handing out food to those who'd been dumped there by ICE. They didn't even notify Annunciation House and Ruben Garcia to make sure that there was temporary shelter available to those families. The next day, you and I and many other of our fellow El Pasoans were serving them lunch in the temporary shelters that had been provided at no cost to the federal taxpayer. One of the poorest urban counties in the United States of America stepped up, made sandwiches, bought pizzas. We're there for those, providing medical care, clothing, and a roof over their heads. Our city, our country, at its absolute best. It didn't make us any less safe. We didn't have any public health issues as a result, despite the scaremongering. And really, it reminds us of who all of us are at some point in our distant history. All of us, if we trace our family tree back far enough, have faced that level of desperation or need, and so often have found a home here in the United States of America. But this is what we're up against. A president who uses incredibly powerful, emotional language to not only describe these asylum seekers as animals or an infestation, but to conflate them with MS-13 and to warn you that they are coming to get your children, take their places in high school, or kill them where they sit. That was his message in the State of the Union 2 years ago. So we've got to tell our own stories, not just of what you did and I did and others in El Paso, but those dreamers, people like Marcelino Serna, more than 100 years ago, from Chihuahua, came to El Paso, served in the First World War in the United States Army, though his drill sergeant warned him off, said, Serna, every man in this unit is going to France, but not every man will return. You're not a citizen. You don't have to do this. But like any good American, he did, came back and brought distinction and honor, not just upon himself or his hometown, but was the most highly decorated veteran from the state of Texas in all of World War I. And as this country contemplates building walls, our community just dedicated an international bridge to Ciudad Juarez, and we named it after Marcelino Serna. So those dreamers, those immigrants, those asylum seekers, those refugees, there's a powerful, positive, profound, emotional story that we can tell as well. It starts for me, and for you, it sounds like, in El Paso, Texas. And part of the way that we campaign is to share that story everywhere with everyone. Thank you for asking.
Right
Appreciate
in
it. Thank
front
for
of
what
you.
you're
If you
doing.
look straight ahead, here we go.
Hi, Beto. My name's Lauren. I just had a few questions. Well, I had one question, really. My voice sounds so weird in this thing. I'm like, what is this? So you mentioned how this country was built on the backs of slaves, and I really got behind that. That really got me going. But I had a question about, there are a few Democratic nominees who are talking about reparations, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were on paying back the descendants of slaves.
Thanks for the question. I had the same question, and I called somebody that I really respect named Brian Stevenson, who was one of those who helped to build a memorial to peace and justice in Montgomery, Alabama, who, in some real constructive criticism, said, far too often we talk about civil rights or the experience of African Americans in terms of triumphs and victories. I was just in Greensboro, North Carolina. In 1960, 4 young people, by sitting at that lunch counter in that Woolworths, kind of shocked the conscience of the country and ensured that there was a demand for change. The Friendship 9 in Rock Hill, South Carolina, the Freedom Riders in the Deep South, John Lewis crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We like to, and maybe it's I like to, or people who look like me like to, tell those stories about, what, we overcame this. People overcame this. We're a better country for it. But in his memorial to justice and peace, he describes the lynchings, the brutality, the violence visited upon people in this country based on their race and the color of their skin. Just outside of Houston, Texas, in Fort Bend, they just discovered a graveyard, not from the days of slavery or the era of the Civil War, but at the turn of the last century, convict gangs comprised of Black Americans who were arrested for the color of their skin to supply a labor need in that community and were literally worked to death. As they do the forensic investigation, they see the muscles torn literally from the bones on that body. These are the challenges and the legacies that we live with today, that continue today. And what Brian Stevenson told me is that before you're talking about payments and money, you must talk about the truth and the facts and our full story. Everyone must understand what is happening in this country. Now, he said, you may not be able to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like you had in South Africa. You may not be able to force the coming together that we are beginning to see in Rwanda. You may not have, as they did in Germany, forcing every single citizen, or almost every citizen, to go to those places that they would otherwise deny to address their complicity in the problem that they created in the deaths of millions. We need something like that here, but I'll just be honest with you. Given the composition of this country and the fact that we are still a white majority and that far too many people who look like me aren't going to voluntarily take that action, Brian Stevenson says this has to happen at a community by community level. Now, I'm all for Sheila Jackson Lee's bill that would set up a reparations commission. I would sign that into law in a heartbeat. But I want to make sure that in every community, at every level, here in the Commonwealth of Virginia perhaps especially, that we are ready to have that conversation, person to person, eyeball to eyeball, just like we're doing in this room right now. I'm convinced if we do that, we will form the consciousness and the political will to take the action necessary, to repair the damage done, repair the root of the word reparation, and to stop visiting that injustice on future generations. Thank you for asking the question. Really appreciate it.
Okay, and I know there's so many hands up. I'm really sorry, but I only have time for these 2 left.
Okay. Hi.
Hi. I'm Rabbi Ruti Riggin. I'm an ADAPT activist who you haven't met yet. I'm here to ask a question and express concern about the way you've been talking about mental health. Because I know since you've been connected with ADAPT, you know that our core human rights, civil rights demand is that we don't want to be locked up in institutions, and we want to control our own lives. And you've been going around the country describing what goes on in prisons coercively as appropriate mental health care. So my question is, what would you do? Okay.
Let's let her finish. Yeah.
I know what I'm about.
Please continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm friendly, it's okay. So my question here is, what would you do as president to protect the fundamental civil rights of people with disabilities, including mental health disabilities, to control our own health care, to make our own healthcare decisions, to not get locked up in institutions and control our own lives? What would you do to protect those rights?
Yeah, thank you for being here, and thanks for the constructive criticism. I'm not doing an effective job of communicating my point, so I'm going to take to heart some of your suggestions. When I talk about jails being the primary provider of mental health care services in states like mine, I'm trying to say that's not right. You shouldn't have to throw a chair through a window to get arrested in order to get treatment, but some people are doing that right now. And when I say universal care, it means that everybody is able to afford to get primary mental specialty reproductive health care But you bring up a specific issue and question with which I'm somewhat familiar. My sister Erin has some pretty significant disabilities. And we saw the consequence of a lack of funding for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. We're funding it at something like 17% of what we should be funding it right now from the federal level. So we need to fight to make sure that happens. But we also have a problem due to, I think, a lack of awareness, not out of malice, where Democrats and Republicans alike sometimes think that the answer to those living with disabilities today is to institutionalize them, when the real answer is to guarantee their independence, to allow them to live at home or with their families. Not only would that cost a fraction of what we spend right now to institutionalize Americans who are living with disabilities, but it allows them the independence and the volition to live to their full potential, contribute even more to the success of our economy, of our country, in ways that you can measure financially, and in ways that you can't. Quality of life, the poetry that they'll write, the paintings that they'll make, the small businesses that they will start, the people that they will employ. So I want to do everything I can as president to make sure that we help people maintain or gain their independence if they have lost it already. And awareness that you're helping to bring to the conversation is essential before the change can take place. And for that, I am grateful that you are here for raising the issue. Thank you.
Hey, we're right here by the door again, and this will be our last question.
Okay.
Hi, I have a two-part question. I'm Charles from Fairfax, Virginia. Number one, what's your favorite hockey team? And number two, what's your position on capital punishment and your plans for criminal justice reform?
Okay. Real quick, the El Paso Rhinos. You would not expect to find a hockey team in the Chihuahuan Desert, and yet there we are. I oppose capital punishment. And briefly, because we touched on some of this earlier, because we lock up more people than any other country per capita, because they are disproportionately comprised of color, because too many are there for nonviolent drug crimes, including possession of marijuana. Talk about ending the war on drugs. Talk about and enact an end to the prohibition on marijuana. Talk about expunging the arrest records for those in possession of something that you will not die from, to which I don't think you can become addicted. And which in many cases alleviates the symptoms of conditions that otherwise you would be prescribing opioids to treat. So expunge those arrest records, end for-profit prisons. No one should be making a profit off of locking people up or sending lobbyists to the Capitol to argue for mandatory minimums or longer sentences. These are some places to start. And then if we add to that or follow the lead of Houston, Texas, and end cash bail so that you're not too poor to get out of jail and have your freedom, then I think we'll really be making some progress. Let me just say in conclusion, because Kanik began in this way, I'll end in this way. Si queremos enfrentar los retos de este país, del cambio climático, cuidado de salud por todos y la reforma migratoria, necesitamos en este país una democracia en que podemos contar cada voto, podemos escuchar a cada voz. Estoy en esta campaña en su estado, or Commonwealth, como se dice en English, para presentarme y también para escuchar y entender las ideas, las quejas y las oportunidades de este país. I'm grateful to be here with you. Learned so much by listening to you. Looking forward to the next visit. And Kanik and Alexandria, thank you for having us out. We are very, very, very grateful. Thank you very much. Adios.